and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I want to share a book with you, an art book that I've had for a little bit, maybe just over a year and a bit, but I really love this book and I think it's very valuable and it has a lot of important information, so I do want to share it with you. I don't buy a lot of art books, but I do have a few that I really treasure, and this is definitely one of them. This is from the Urban Sketching Handbook series, and there are a ton of books in this series. And so if you don't know what an urban sketcher is or what urban sketching is, it's basically drawing on location. So it might be when you see someone sitting in a city and they're sketching live, what they're sketching is what's in front of them. That's pretty much an urban sketcher. And this is an artist that I follow on Instagram, and that's how I found out about the book, because I actually follow her art and it's beautiful. Her name is Katie Woodward, and I believe her contact information is in the back. Let me grab it quickly for you. So her Instagram handle is Rambling Sketcher, and her website is ramblingsketcher.com. And the thing I really like about this book and what Katie talks about is how to paint light, or how to paint dark, really how to paint in like a dark scene. The Urban Sketching series has a bunch of books that are concentrated little handbooks that talk about one specific subject. They have a range of things from essential concepts and techniques, tips, tricks, and handy hacks. How to build a practice for sketching on location, mastering perspective, which I think would be a great one to have, painting nature using watercolors and color media on the go, tips and tricks for drawing on location, mastering digital drawing even, drawing on location from unexpected perspectives. The list goes on. They have a ton of books in the series and they're all very valuable. I really recommend you check it out. I'll put a link in the description below to this book and a link to all of the Urban Sketching handbooks that are on online that I can find on Amazon. So let's take a look at this one. This one is about understanding light, portraying light effects in on-location drawing and painting. So the Urban Sketching series really talks about, or these books really focus on an urban sketching perspective, but I think it could apply to any artist, especially for specific disciplines. And in this case, understanding light, which I think is something I always, I don't know if I struggle with it, but I'm always feeling like I have something to learn. So this book has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 sections that are important. It talks about value, color, skies and atmosphere, reflections, foliage, and night scenes. And so those are the chapters that are broken down in the book. On almost every page, nearly every page, I would say every page, there's illustrative examples of art in the book that talk about the section that it's trying to describe. It gives you examples of why that section is useful, and with the illustrated images it gives an example of that discipline. This section goes over the tools that you might need for urban sketching if you are interested in getting into the hobby and you are not into it already. This section talks about key terms in regards to light and shadow, understanding the form of shadow and light, and the different shapes that are created and the different depths that are created with shadows when you have a light source. And so it starts with the first section, key value, or key one is value, and just understanding what that means and the structure of it and how to look for value in light and what things to keep in mind. The great thing about the examples that she gives in the book, they're from a variety of artists, and it talks about how they made the sketch or what mediums they used, where they did it sometimes, and the size and how long it took them to do each sketch. And in each one it also talks about the way the sketch applies to the lesson that's being told about in that chapter. Exploring cast shadows. This gives a bunch of examples about cast shadows, what to look for, what structure to think about and consider when you're trying to draw cast shadows. And this one, merging shadow shapes, and this is in a single color, and yet it still gives that illusion of light, and you understand that there's a sharp sun in this drawing, for example. It's pretty powerful to have those fundamentals, and when you do, it can really elevate your painting. This section talks about color, which I think is extremely important. And not only because color can be light or dark, but thinking about the tones of that color or the shades of that color, if it's in shadow or in light. This gives the same image, and it gives different lighting situations, talking about overcast, backlit lighting, late afternoon, sunset, and of course nighttime lighting and what that looks like. And I think overcast has to be the most challenging as a painter to getting depth in your paintings, because you don't have that light source and those shadows to create that depth. And it talks about how that works and how to approach it in a way that's still going to convey as a subject that does have depth and give your paintings as much life as it would have with a sharp shadow. It talks in this section about limited palettes, limited color palettes, sketching with mud and what happens when your colors get muddy and how to make that work to your advantage, cast shadows in color. And I think I had commented when the artist was getting ready to release this book, and I made a comment about painting lights and shadows and how challenging that was. And one of the things that seems so simple, but she recommended, she gave me a great feedback on my comment and suggested remembering that shadows are always cool colors and lights are more warm colors typically. And just having that knowledge is, you know, it's something that you don't think about, but when you see it, it makes sense. And so when you see it translated, it helps just make your painting that much more closer to feeling realistic or achieving the look of that subject. This is a gallery of cast shadows in color, and different artists give different examples and they're using different mediums. So you can get a real grasp on different ways to portray this this technique without having to apply it to just one specific medium. This talks about reflected light. And then it shows a bunch of examples and talks about that light and how the light changes based on what it's reflecting off of, where it's reflecting to. Sculpting a sketch with shadow, working basically in the negative space. And it gives a bunch of examples, again, describing each of the paintings or the artist's pieces. Like, for example, this one's in colored pencil. So you do get a variety of examples that you could apply maybe to your art style if it's not directly just watercolor. This section talks about skies and atmosphere, which I think is hugely important. And one of the biggest things, I think, once you learn about atmospheric perspective, at least for me, it never leaves me. And I think about it every time I draw an outdoor scene or even indoor too. And I especially notice atmospheric perspective out west when I go out there and I see the mountains and the rolling hills and I see the tree lines start to change color as they proceed in or recede into the distance. And it's all atmospheric perspective. And once you know that and you can apply it to your paintings, then it just gives it that elevated look of realism that is easier to achieve because you have that knowledge. This section talks about fog as well, which is sort of in the same realm. Using soft edges, overcast days, and clouds. And each chapter as well has this checklist, this observation checklist, which asks you questions about what you're looking at to understand what it is that you're trying to draw and what are the things, the properties that make it unique for that situation. Here's some more cloud examples, and clouds are so varied. I mean, they can be anything, they can be nothing, and they can be very specific at the same time. Sunrises and sunsets, which definitely play to light and really help read different times of day. Noticing that there's these longer cast shadows when the sun is setting and how things can be just illuminated at the tops of buildings or objects and how everything else does fall in shadow. Also talking about backlight, which you don't really think about much, but when the sun is coming from behind the subject or there is an illuminated portion behind the subject that you're painting, thinking about how that light reacts, it's so easy to just position ourselves to be with the sun at our back and shining on the subject or shining from a corner towards the subject, but to actually be behind it really creates a different, unique perspective, and it has different considerations when you're painting to get that look and effect. This section here 4 talks about reflections, and understanding those, especially with shiny surfaces or something that creates sharp reflections, or where you're going to see more of the light bouncing back towards the viewer. Painting water is definitely a good example of this, and how that makes the painting feel and how it looks, and depending on the surface of that you're sketching, if it's a soft surface or a sharp surface, what those reflections look like. And something so simple as the detail at the bottom of this painting here, but knowing that that's a shiny surface, and talking about what makes that look like a reflective surface versus just some ticks and dashes and color drops. Like, it's amazing to think. It's so simple, but it's so important, and it reads so differently when you understand those properties. This is floor and ceiling reflections, so looking within, inside buildings, and how those reflections behave in those sorts of environments, and thinking about the light sources too, because you're not just going to have one point of light. You could have unnatural light as well as natural light, and how that affects how those reflections appear. This is windows and glass, and again the checklist of what to look for and what questions to ask yourself when you're trying to decide how to draw or paint those reflections to look accurate. Lots of examples. Reflective objects, and a variety of examples. This one has a musical instrument, and this has a musical instrument as well, but more like a wood varnish surface. Chrome, or this metallic, the bean in Chicago. Glass, of course, which is extremely complicated. I think just because there's so much detail you can draw with reflective glass. So many details that are important to portray that. This section talks about foliage, so a lot of natural light and how the light comes through the foliage, that dappled light, warm greens versus cool greens, where you see those greens, how they fall in relativity to the light source and the object that's shading the light source. Shadows under foliage. And then sunbeams, which can be especially gorgeous and challenging to paint, for sure in watercolor. I think all the time we concentrate on keeping the whites of the paper, but understanding where to put the highlights and the shadows and how to preserve them or how to lift them to bring them back into the scene is important. And then dappled light, which is usually from a canopy of foliage, and a lot of examples in different medias showing that as well, depicted in those illustrations. There's so many ways to do this and so many ways to see it. And the last section, which I think is the main reason I did buy this book, for the night scenes. And this artist, Katie, is an amazing artist when it comes to night paintings and with watercolor, which seems like the most challenging thing, but she just is amazing at it. I really suggest you check out her Instagram, because you could learn a lot just from seeing how she depicts something in such a simplistic way that reads so powerfully and so accurate. This talks about multiple light sources at night and night skies, which of course are going to have some sort of illumination to them as well. They're not always completely black. Street lights and how those lights play into the scene and create that glow. Street lights here, just more examples, which are pretty powerful. And neon, which I can't even imagine painting neon. I can imagine that's very, very challenging. And probably not just the neon, but the surrounding reflections and shadows and lighting that comes off the neon would be the most challenging part, I think. And this gives a lot more examples, which are beautiful. And of course, special lighting as well. Sporting events or under stadium lights. And so at the back of the book here is a list of challenges, which I want to share with you because they're pretty unique and interesting. And so once you're done going through everything, you can look at this challenge list and try these things to see how you would depict them, all these different types of paintings based on what you've learned. So there's sketch a body of water, sketch a shiny object, sketch a shiny object with a medium you haven't used before, sketch a neon sign, sketch a storefront at night, sketch a boat floating in the water, sketch a tree or plant being hit with direct sunlight, nice sharp shadows and bright light spots, sketch backlit translucent bottles, sketch a sculpture, sketch someone playing a musical instrument, sketch green foliage without using or mixing green, which I think would be really fun, sketch a sunset, sketch a view at sunset with your back to the sun, and that's something you never think about. I think that would be a really fun challenge. Sketch a concert, sketch a full scene using only 2 values, sketch an object casting a complicated and defined shadow, sketch a column capital in bright sunlight, use atmospheric perspective in a sketch when you don't see it in the view that you're sketching. I think those challenges sound really exciting, and I think you could learn a lot by trying them out. And then at the back here, it talks a little bit about the author, and she is a New York City-based author and has a background. Actually, she says she has a background in painting scenery for theater, including a BFA in theatrical production arts from Ithaca College, and spent 10 years painting scenery and making props from regional theater to Broadway, which I think is pretty amazing. She's been doing this since 2014, urban sketching, and I know she is a big figure in the urban sketching scene in New York City. Her art is just beautiful. And that brings us to the end of the book. I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you are interested in elevating your art game a little bit, I think this book could be really useful. It's just such an interesting perspective to think about painting light and how light falls at nighttime with watercolor. I think it's such an interesting challenge, and it's something I would love to be better at or stronger at, and it's always something I'm thinking about. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend this book. I'll leave links in the description below if you'd like to check out the book or the author's page as well. And yeah, if you have any art books that you really love and you think that they would be really fun to review, just leave them in the comments. I'd be interested in taking a look. I have a few more books I do want to share with you coming up, maybe in a few videos. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this look in the meantime, and if you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up to let me know you liked it, and subscribe so you're notified the next time I post a video to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.